Alright, hey guys, I basically wanted to go over a video today describing a couple of different things. Mostly Blizzard's misrepresentation of numbers that they've released, and it's both for OWL and then for their player base, and so I want to go through some different examples and have my notes. Basically breaking down different things that make the numbers that they have that are public seem really not that good and kind of a bit they're kind of lying to us. So I'm gonna break the numbers down a bit, and then I've gone over this before in a Medium post. I basically talked about will the Overwatch League succeed, and what are the reasons it might succeed, what are the reasons it might not succeed. So I kind of briefly went over some of the things, but this is mostly just gonna be the numbers. So I've done a little bit of research on some numbers, and then I'll just break down some of them. So get started. So there's been tweets consistently from them on their main Overwatch Twitter about the player base, and it's been really disingenuous. So we can see one of the tweets, basically I'll pull it up. 10 million Overwatch agents activated and counting. So they've never really necessarily given us any info. It's been mostly just a tweet like that where it's okay, 10 million accounts, 10 million active players, 10 million what? Has there been 10 million Overwatch games bought? There's no information on this. They've given just vague numbers. So with a little bit of speculation and a little bit of some good reasoning, I guess we can kind of just break down some of these numbers. So let's see, where's the sheet? So yeah, they tweeted most of the big milestones of this is how many million members we have, but it's really disingenuous. It can't. So when I think of examples, I think of other games who do it better. CS:GO, you can see on Steam on their front page, this is how many active members we had this month. So you know how many people have logged in to Counter-Strike. If it's been one game, if they're dedicated, you don't know, but you know around, what is a baseline number? 9 to 11 million? It's somewhere around there, usually. So you know that many people have logged in to play Counter-Strike this month. What we don't know is the 10 million, 20 million, 40 million. It's not active members. There's no way it's active members. There's no way they would characterize that if they had a massive player base where it was 300 million, there's no way they would characterize and be so vague with the wording. So it seems really disingenuous. I've seen League of Legends do this better, where they've done a breakdown. They're usually ones who don't release much info, but they've been ones who have said, this is how many active I can't remember, it was actively concurrent members, this is how many people actively play in a month. They did a breakdown of how many games are played, how many hours of League are played. So there was way more numbers given to us as the general populace to actually understand their metrics. There's different things that you can look up. So let's see. There was a website. I'm not sure if I can show. Can't remember. Maybe I can find it. Let's see. Here it is. All right. Top grossing titles by category. So basically, this is just a breakdown of categories of different things that made a certain amount of money. And I saw this August 2017. This is when they had August 2017. So this is past this, but they've had so many millions of players. But we can see in this, the breakdown is, of course, League of Legends. League of Legends has been making billions of dollars. But then we see the breakdown of each individual thing underneath it. Top grossing titles ranked by August 27 earnings. So by that, are we understanding that this is just game sales and in-game sales? Something like World of Tanks, I feel would be way down with what Overwatch has boasted in terms of Twitch numbers and Crossfire, Dungeon Fighter Online. Things like these games with the numbers that they've kind of alluded to is something that you would think oh, it's way below that. But You can see Counter-Strike and Dota 2 are games that I think are on Overwatch's level with player base. They're probably a little bit higher, but they're the games that are around the same level as it. So it's things like that are a little bit concerning because you see other information on this and it leads you to believe other conclusions. So there's basically the chart here, which is just a breakdown of how many members they have. But I wanted to also break down the possible members that they can have. So of all the popular games, if you think out there, there is League, Counter-Strike, Dota, PUBG, Fortnite. Fortnite's the other exception to this, but all of those games are single platform, or the player bases on consoles are not enough to be significant. There's no real big games out there besides like Fortnite, which has just recently come out to consoles, but Overwatch has released and been sold on consoles as an active game. So when you compare the player bases, it's pretty disingenuous to say this game is bigger than this game, like comparing like Dota to Overwatch or something, because Dota is strict, strong core PC, Overwatch, Xbox, PlayStation, PC. So having like even a similar amount of players playing actively is really bad for your title because it's basically saying you have a third of what would normally be there because it's split amongst 3 games. And so things like these numbers where it's like 40 million, it leads me to believe some different things as well because there's different things on consoles that you can do compared to PCs. So I'm not sure if they're referring to 40 million copies of Overwatch sold because that might be interpreted differently than if it was 20 million copies of Overwatch sold, but some of the console versions you can buy it. So I would buy a console Overwatch version, and I would play it on my active Xbox Live account. Does that only count as one sale? But what if my brother has another active Overwatch, or he has an active Xbox Live account and he plays on that? Does that count as 2 accounts? Does that count as 2 players? From what I think, it counts as 2, and they would count that as 2. But that's only one Overwatch game sold, so you can have a household. Granted, this isn't the majority, but I imagine for like younger players, they play it and they have a parent that plays it or they have a sibling that plays it, and so it's like 2 or 3 accounts for one version of Overwatch. They don't each individually have to buy it. So that applies both to Xbox and PlayStation. I think there's also different things you can do with like you can make like an account and like add a 2-day Xbox Live trial to it and then make an account on Overwatch and start playing. And will that count as an active account because you've actively played and you have server information? Will that count? Things like that. And then there's also like the whole on PC you can have Smurfs and people playing on like the same accounts and different things like that. So it's a whole mess of like actually how many like active players is there? When there isn't any information out there, you're just left to speculate. There's things like this that come up where it's like there's no 40 million people playing each month. It's not even necessarily 40 million games of Overwatch sold. It could have been way less, but we don't really know that. And so like they've kind of just misconstrued, not given us any information, been like 40 million, isn't it a big number? Like, yes, it is a big number, but we don't have any of the information behind that to support if it's actually like a genuine number. Next, we move on to the player base is a mess, but then I want to break down some different things. So for the Overwatch League, basically, I wanted to break down some numbers on, I guess, just basically some metrics that we actually have now, and then breaking down some of the other like misconstrued numbers. So the biggest number out there is the $20 million buy-in, which is supposedly going up to 35 to 60 million. This number seems so disingenuous and shit to me. There's no way, I've thought about this. There's no way that the people who were like buying slots, there probably was a processing fee or a league fee to get into the league. It was probably like $1 million or a couple million to get into the league. But implying that like one city would be paying 20 million and then another city would also be paying 20 million. So the Mayhem one or the Miami one makes absolutely no sense when you break it down into like a context of this. So it's like Yeah, I want to bring my 7 roster, so basically one staff, 6 players into the league, and assuming that that roster would have spent 20 million to get Miami, Florida, and now is magically Florida. They're the only one with a state. All the other ones are cities. Everything else is a city. New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, those are all cities. But this one apparently gets the state, or is it Miami? I'm not exactly sure. It's not going to be able to be like a state population going to every game. You have the stadium in a city, and this is what they were sold on, was the potential to have a local audience. So I imagine there was a league fee, but I don't imagine every single city was sold the same amount. I imagine a city like New York, LA especially, Seoul, Shanghai. These were the cities where you could have said, this is probably $15-20 million for a league slot, because if you look at the populations, 10 million. For Seoul, that's a lot of people, and it's a very condensed city. Shanghai, 24 million. New York, 8.5 million. These are big cities with huge populated, controlled populations that, like, if you have an event, it's much easier to get people to go there than, say, if you have one in Miami, where the crossover of esports viewers and connoisseurs is going to be lesser, especially in a city like Boston or Miami, where it hasn't been as developed as compared to Shanghai or Seoul, where it's much more accepted. And so spots where it was more expensive, it makes a ton more sense to have something there. So, like, my example to basically explain it to people is, imagine like being a person who's looking to buy an ice cream shop, and you want to buy 2 ice cream shops. So you go to a person for a loan, and you say, all right, I live in Miami, Florida. I would like to buy an ice cream shop. And they say, okay. I know it's a shit example, but I'm just using the same numbers as Overwatch League. Okay, to purchase this ice cream shop that's in a good part of Miami, it will cost you $20 million. And you're like, that's weird. This other person I was talking to said I could have one in the middle of Shanghai, and it would also cost me 20 million. But the one in Shanghai is going to make me way fucking more revenue because it's the only one in China, and I'll have the majority of the Chinese population coming to it, and also there'll be a lot more people passing through it because the population density is way bigger in Shanghai. So it doesn't make sense that you would sell people for the same thing. Say basically like, hey, your audience is going to be smaller, please pay me the same amount. That doesn't make any sense. So if you look any of this information up, it's all just sites citing that basically someone paid $20 million for an Overwatch League spot, which isn't necessarily paid in full from the beginning. You have to pay it over time, obviously. And so some of these investors and groups that you've seen, they didn't raise $20 million. Maybe they raised $20 million for their esports team for separate games and things like that, but it doesn't really make any sense that, like, there's such stark differences between the cities and like the amount of people that would even watch from a certain position, that they would be paying the maximum amount, the same as someone else who would be getting a way better value. It doesn't make much sense at all. So like the breakdown of like buy-ins doesn't make that much sense. The cost going up makes sense if the league fee is going up. The league fee is probably going up, but it doesn't make sense that it would be like the same for each individual city. So like, say if a new city was to be brought on, it was like Busan or like where I live or somewhere like some small ass town, then it wouldn't make any sense to like have the two being like treated equally, because it would be like the population is just like miles apart. So the other number we have that's somewhat a breakdown of like money is basically the Twitch bits given to different teams. So again, it's not super fair because I don't imagine all the Chinese fans are watching on Twitch. There's other places to watch it. I don't imagine the Korean teams necessarily as well. So it's a bit mixed because it's like Koreans and Chinese, maybe not for sure all on Twitch, but to watch all the games. But what makes sense to me basically is Fuel and Outlaws getting the highest. Even though their populations aren't that high, it makes sense to me because Texas has a lot of disposable income. Texas really wasn't affected by the American economical disaster, basically, where a bunch of other states are having like major problems. Texas has actually been like one of the places where it's been fine. And so people have a lot of free money here. So it makes sense that these two teams technically have the highest bit counts because Texas is all about big money. I don't know if I can really say that if you haven't lived here, but there's a lot of people who spend a lot of money, so it makes sense to me. Then whenever we break down the rest of the teams, they're starting to make like a little bit more sense. Like the middle of the pack makes some sense. I feel like the LA teams would be a bit higher than what they are. But then once we get to the bottom four, it's very similar. Uprising, Shock, and Mayhem, they're the bottom three teams for population, so that makes the most sense to be. The Shanghai one also mentioned it before. It was a little bit different, but when we break down the bit count, it starts to be more understandable. Like the more people that would like gravitate towards these teams it starts to make a little bit more sense. So I feel like the breakdown somewhat makes sense where the teams that have money and that have had popular players, of course, are getting more Twitch bits, but also the populations do a system with this where we can see it's basically like the more population they have, the higher the Twitch bits went. Where the lower population actually makes sense, where they like tended to lead towards the bottom. So it makes some sense. Another thing that's kind of like a little bit not as researched or whatever, but is like understanding the player base is like whenever you look at Twitch, you notice that whenever you compare games, you can kind of guess and see where a game and how well a game is doing. If a game doesn't really have any players, then a lot of times there won't be any motivation for anyone to go on Twitch and actually like seek out any options, even if there is good people who are wanting to be entertaining and like make money off of it. There really isn't anything for them. So if you look maybe under, I'm trying to think of a good example of a game that really isn't alive anymore. Maybe like StarCraft 2. There really isn't that many streamers, and probably the vast majority of them only get a couple hundred viewers. Very similar to Overwatch. There's only a couple streamers that do get like thousands of viewers, and that's usually like one or two who are like active at that time. And a lot of times it's not super like high viewership base. It's basically Overwatch League that gets all the viewers, and then everyone else is not that much. But if you look at examples of like League, Fortnite, PUBG, a lot of these games have streamers who get like a lot of viewer numbers, and I know it's bad to like give that as an example, but it's understandable why these streamers do it. If they know a game is popular, they're going to play the game and they're going to get a lot of viewers, and in turn they get a lot of money themselves. So it makes sense. So whenever I see Overwatch not doing that well on Twitch, it's kind of understandable. We've run the course, and the active player base is still there, but it's not as big as it's been misconstrued to be from Blizzard.